This 4-year-old beggar girl finds a millionaire and his son buried alive on a country road. But when she goes to help them, someone appears from behind and does something that shocks everyone. Comment and give my story a rating from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The metallic clang of cans, banging against each other, echoed along the dusty dirt road outside Harmony Creek, Kansas, as 4-year-old Daisy dragged her torn plastic bag under the scorching afternoon sun. Her bare feet were covered in red dust, and the faded floral dress she wore had long lost its original color after so many days without a proper wash. The little girl stopped every few feet, squatting to examine any glint that might be a discarded soda can on the roadside. Daisy had been living on the streets for nearly 2 months, ever since her mum disappeared one morning without a trace. Her Aunt Bernice, 38, had promised to take care of her, but always made excuses to leave her alone. "Girl, you're old enough to fend for yourself," Bernice would say, whenever Daisy knocked on the door of her makeshift home behind an abandoned lot. "Go collect your cans and don't bother me at work." Bernice's job was at the sprawling estate of the Montgomery family, where she'd been cleaning the main house for 15 years. It was a job she guarded fiercely, especially after being kicked out of her own home at 16 when she got pregnant. That estate was her only source of income, and she'd do anything to keep it. On that particular afternoon, dark clouds gathering on the horizon promised yet another of the torrential thunderstorms that had been battering the region for 8 consecutive months. Daisy looked at the sky with concern. When it rained, she needed to find shelter wherever she could, and sleeping wet meant being cold all night. The girl continued her walk along the rural road leading to the Montgomery estate, hoping to find some cans that the workers might have dropped while transporting grain. She always had better luck on this road, mainly because the trucks passed by loaded and sometimes lost things along the way. It was as she rounded a sharp bend that something caught her attention. The recent rains had opened a large crater on the side of the road, right where one of the alternative routes to the farm used to be. The hole was deep, and there was earth and stones scattered around. Daisy approached with curiosity, as any child would. That's when she heard it. A muffled sound like a low groan came from inside the crater. The girl crouched on the edge, trying to see better into the dark depths of the hole. The sound repeated, clearer this time. It was definitely a human voice. "Help!" came the weak voice from within the earth. "Please, someone help us!" Daisy's heart leaped. There were people trapped down there. She shouted back, "Is someone there? I can hear you!" "Yes," replied the voice, more animated now. "There are 2 of us. We've been trapped here for a long time. Please call someone." Daisy recognized one of the voices. It was Leonard Montgomery, 52, the owner of the estate where her aunt worked. She had seen him a few times when she managed to sneak into the back of the main house looking for food. The other one must be Evan, his nephew, a 23-year-old who was always walking around the farm checking the crops. The girl stood up immediately, ready to run to the main house and get help, but before she could take the first step, a firm hand grabbed her arm tightly. "Where do you think you're going, Daisy?" It was Bernice. Her aunt had appeared as if from nowhere, her face sweaty and her eyes shining in a strange way. She was wearing her work uniform, which meant she had left the estate during working hours. "Aunt Bernice, there are people trapped in the hole. Your boss and Evan are down there," shouted Daisy, trying to break free. Bernice looked at the crater and then back at the girl. Her face showed no surprise, just a cold expression that Daisy had never seen before. "I know," said Bernice simply. "Oh, what do you mean you know? We have to help them." "We don't have to do anything," replied Bernice, squeezing the girl's arm even harder. "And you're not going to tell anyone about this." Daisy didn't understand what was happening. Why didn't her aunt want to help the trapped people? Why did she know they were there? "But Aunt, they could get hurt. They could get sick." "Listen carefully, Daisy," said Bernice, crouching down to be at the girl's level and speaking softly, but with an intensity that frightened the child. "That man was going to ruin the lives of 40 families in this region. He was going to fire everyone and sell the estate. I've worked there for 15 years, girl. 15 years cleaning that man's house, and he was going to throw me out on the street like I was trash." Tears began to stream down Daisy's face. She didn't fully understand her aunt's words, but she understood enough to know that something was very wrong. "You're not going to tell anyone what you saw here, you hear? If you open your mouth, I'll abandon you for good. You'll be alone in the world, with no one." The threat hit Daisy like a slap. Even though Bernice wasn't the best caregiver, she was the only person the girl had in the world. The idea of being completely alone terrified her. Bernice released the girl's arm and stood up. "Let's get out of here, and if I find out you said anything—" The sentence hung in the air, but the threat was clear. Daisy looked once more at the crater, from which muffled cries for help still came, and followed her aunt back along the road, her heart heavy and her mind confused. That night, while Bernice slept in their makeshift home, Daisy remained awake, staring at the corrugated iron roof and listening to the heavy rain. The desperate voices echoed in her mind, and she knew she couldn't simply pretend that nothing had happened. The early hours of the morning brought with them a restlessness that Daisy had never felt before. The girl tossed and turned on the piece of cardboard that served as her bed, unable to shake from her mind the desperate voices that still echoed from inside the crater. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the sweaty face and cold eyes of her Aunt Bernice, and felt again the firm grip on her arm. Bernice slept heavily a few feet away, snoring softly after having drunk half a bottle of moonshine that she kept hidden behind a pile of old bricks. It was always like this when she got nervous, or when something bothered her at work. Daisy had already learned to recognize these moments and to remain quiet and invisible. But tonight was different. No matter how hard she tried, the girl couldn't simply ignore what she had witnessed. In her childish mind, there were people needing help, and that was more important than any threat. Her grandpa, before passing away 2 years ago, always told her that helping those in need was the most important thing a person could do. "My stubborn little granddaughter," he used to say, tousling her curly hair. "You have a heart too big for this world. But never lose that stubbornness, you hear? Sometimes it's stubbornness that makes us do what's right." And Daisy was indeed stubborn. When she decided on something, it was almost impossible to make her change her mind. This characteristic had caused her problems before, but it had also saved her from dangerous situations when others tried to take advantage of her vulnerable condition. Around 4 in the morning, when she was sure that Bernice was fast asleep, Daisy got up silently. She put on her worn flip-flops and grabbed a small broken flashlight that she had found in the trash a few days before. The battery was almost dead, but it still gave a faint light that would be better than nothing. The girl left the makeshift house carefully, trying not to make any noise. The early morning air was humid and cold, and she pulled tighter the holey wool cardigan she always wore. The road was silent, with only the distant sound of crickets and the wind rustling the leaves of the trees. Daisy knew those paths well. During the 2 months living on the streets, she had explored every trail, every shortcut, every corner of the region in search of food, shelter, or anything that could be useful. She knew exactly how to get to the Montgomery estate without using the main road. Her heart beat fast in her chest as she walked along the narrow path that cut through a small grove. She was afraid of what Bernice would do if she found out about her disobedience, but she couldn't simply leave those people suffering. She remembered the stories her grandpa told about courageous people who did the right thing, even when it was difficult. After 20 minutes of walking, she arrived at the back of the estate. The main house was an old but well-maintained building, painted white with blue trim. There was a large porch in the front and manicured gardens around it. It was the kind of house that Daisy only saw in her dreams, when she imagined what it would be like to have a real home. She knew that she needed to find someone who could help, but she couldn't simply knock on the main door. Then she remembered Martha, the cook at the estate. The 61-year-old woman had always been kind to her the few times they had met. Martha usually woke up very early to prepare breakfast for the owners and the workers. Daisy went around the house to the back, where the kitchen was located. A yellow light shone through the window, and she could hear the sound of pans being moved. Martha was already working. The girl approached the window and tapped lightly on the glass. Martha, who was stirring a large pot of oatmeal, turned around, startled. When she saw Daisy outside, her face showed concern. "Girl, what are you doing here at this hour?" asked Martha, opening the window. "Where's your aunt?" "Mrs. Martha, you need to help me," said Daisy, her voice trembling with nervousness and urgency. "There are people trapped on the road. Mr. Montgomery and Evan are inside a hole." Martha frowned, not understanding. "What do you mean, child?" "What hole?" "On the road that goes to town. There's a big crater and they're inside. I heard them calling for help." Martha's expression changed immediately. She knew Daisy well enough to know that the girl wouldn't make up a story like that. Besides, she had noticed that both Leonard and Evan hadn't shown up for dinner the night before, which was strange. "Wait here," said Martha, closing the window quickly. A few minutes later, she came out through the back door, carrying a large flashlight, and accompanied by two of the farm workers who lived in the houses near the headquarters. Daisy recognized Sam and Joe, middle-aged men who had been working on the coffee harvest for many years. "Show us where it is, girl," said Martha, her voice filled with concern. Daisy guided the group along the main road until they reached the bend where the crater was. When Martha illuminated the hole with her powerful flashlight, everyone could see the extent of the problem. The landslide had created a deep cavity, and it was possible to see pieces of clothing and movement down there. "Good heavens," murmured Martha. "Mr. Montgomery, Evan, are you there?" "Martha," came Leonard's weak voice. "Thank God. We've been here for 18 hours. "Evan is injured, and I can't think straight." The voice of the man, who was normally firm and authoritative, now sounded broken and desperate. Sam and Joe immediately began to assess the situation, discussing the best way to carry out the rescue without causing more landslides. "We need ropes and more people," said Sam. "This hole must be about 4 feet deep." "I'll go get help in town," said Joe, already preparing to run. While the adults organized the rescue, Daisy remained a little apart, watching everything with wide eyes. She felt a mixture of relief for having done the right thing and fear of what would happen when Bernice found out that she had disobeyed. Martha approached her and placed a caring hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing, child. These people could have gotten very sick if no one found them." "Aunt Bernice will be mad at me," whispered Daisy. "Why would your aunt be mad?" "You saved lives, girl." Daisy didn't know how to answer. She couldn't explain to Martha that her aunt already knew about the trapped people and had chosen to leave them there. It was something too complex for her 4-year-old mind to process completely. 2 hours later, with the help of more workers and improvised equipment, Leonard and Evan were finally pulled out of the crater. Both were dirty, dehydrated, and visibly shaken. Evan had a deep cut on his forehead and was limping on his left leg, while Leonard was trembling uncontrollably, and his eyes showed a terror that went beyond physical exhaustion. "I can't stand being in enclosed spaces anymore," murmured Leonard as he was helped to walk. "Walls, ceilings, everything feels like it's going to collapse on top of me." It was at that moment that Daisy saw her Aunt Bernice arriving along the road, running with a face distorted by despair and anger. She had woken up and discovered that the girl was no longer there. The look that Bernice gave Daisy was as cold as ice, and the girl knew immediately that her life was about to get much harder. The tension in the air was palpable as Bernice approached the group gathered around the crater. Her eyes alternated between fury and panic, a dangerous mix that Daisy knew well. The girl instinctively hid behind Martha, seeking protection in the cook's presence. "Daisy, come here right now," said Bernice, her voice controlled but loaded with threat. Martha immediately realized that something was wrong. She had known Bernice for years and knew that the woman wasn't exactly an example of maternal care, but she had never seen that icy expression on her face. "The girl did a good thing, Bernice," said Martha firmly. "If it weren't for her, Mr. Montgomery and Evan could have gotten very sick. She shouldn't have been here," replied Bernice, taking a step towards Daisy. "I told her to stay home." Leonard, who was being supported by Sam, looked up with difficulty. Even in his weakened state, something about Bernice's attitude bothered him. He had worked with her for 15 years and knew her reactions. The lack of surprise or relief on her face was strange. "Bernice," he said in a weak voice, "how did you know we were here?" The question caught Bernice off guard. She hesitated for a few seconds, enough time for Martha and the other workers to notice her strange reaction. "The girl told me," lied Bernice quickly. "She came home saying she had heard voices." But Daisy, even at 4 years old, understood that her aunt was lying. With the cruel innocence of children, she spoke without thinking. "But Auntie, you already knew they were there." "You said you knew." The silence that followed was deafening. All eyes turned to Bernice, who visibly paled. Martha took a step forward, placing herself protectively between Bernice and Daisy. "What is this girl trying to say, Bernice?" asked Martha, her voice low but firm. Evan, who until then had remained quiet, dealing with the pain in his injured leg, raised his head. Even through the confusion and exhaustion, he managed to process the gravity of the situation. "You knew we were trapped?" he asked, incredulous. Bernice looked around, realizing that everyone was waiting for an explanation. Her job, her only source of income, her stability, everything was hanging by a thread. The pressure made her explode. "Yes, I knew," she shouted, tears beginning to flow. "And do you know why? Because that man was going to throw me out on the street. After 15 years cleaning his house, he was going to fire me." The revelation fell like a bomb on the group. Leonard frowned, confused. "Fire? What are you talking about, Bernice? I never said anything about firing you." "Don't lie to me," continued Bernice, completely out of control now. "I overheard your conversations. You're going to sell the estate. You're going to send everyone away." It was then that Evan understood the misunderstanding. In recent months, he and Leonard had had several discussions about the farm's finances, always in hushed tones so as not to alarm the employees. Bernice, who cleaned the house and was always nearby, must have overheard snippets of these conversations. "Bernice," said Evan, his voice tired but patient, "it's not like that. Uncle Leonard isn't going to sell the estate." "Then why do you keep talking about money? Why is he worried about the bills?" asked Bernice, still suspicious. Leonard and Evan exchanged a look full of meaning. There were secrets between them that had been weighing them down for months, issues they preferred to keep private. But now, in the face of that situation, they realized that their silences had created unexpected consequences. "It's complicated," murmured Leonard, avoiding the employee's gaze. It was Martha who broke the tense silence. "Well, complicated or not, now is not the time for these discussions. You two need medical attention, and this child needs a safe place to stay." She looked at Daisy, who remained quiet, watching all the confusion with wide eyes. The girl didn't fully understand what was happening, but she realized that the adults were all nervous and angry. "Daisy will stay with me today," declared Martha, making a decision that surprised everyone. "Bernice, you need to calm down and think about what you did. You almost caused a tragedy because of a misunderstanding." "You can't make that decision," protested Bernice. "She's my responsibility." "Responsibility?" Martha laughed bitterly. "What responsibility? This girl lives on the street scavenging trash. When was the last time you gave her a plate of food?" The accusation hit Bernice hard because it was true. In the past 2 months, since Daisy's mother disappeared, she had done the bare minimum for the girl. She was always too busy, always too tired, always with some excuse not to take on the responsibility she had accepted. Sam and Joe helped Leonard and Evan walk back to the main house. The sun was already rising, and other workers began to arrive for another day of work on the plantation. Soon, the whole estate would know what had happened. During the walk, Leonard couldn't stop trembling. Every time they passed through an area with dense trees that blocked the sun, he panicked. His hands sweated, his breathing became rapid, and he needed to stop to regain his composure. "I can't do it anymore," he murmured. "I can't be in enclosed spaces. How am I going to work in the office? How am I going to go into the processing plant?" Evan watched his uncle with growing concern. Leonard had always been the strongest man he knew, someone capable of solving any problem and making difficult decisions. Seeing him in that state of vulnerability was frightening. After they arrived at the main house, Martha settled Daisy in the kitchen, giving her a glass of warm milk and some homemade cookies. The girl ate voraciously, revealing how hungry she was. It was obvious she hadn't had a proper meal in days. "When was the last time you ate a real meal, honey?" Martha asked gently. "I don't remember," Daisy replied with her mouth full of cookie. "Sometimes I find food in the dumpster behind the grocery store." Martha's heart ached. She had raised 7 children on her own after her husband abandoned her 20 years ago, and she knew how to recognize a neglected child when she saw one. Daisy wasn't just poorly cared for. She was a child in a state of real abandonment. Meanwhile, in the master bedroom of the house, Evan helped Leonard clean up and change clothes. The older man's hands trembled so much that he couldn't even button his shirt. "Uncle," Evan said carefully, "we need to talk about a few things. About the money, about the farm's problems." Leonard stopped trying to button his shirt and looked at his nephew. "Not now, Evan. I can't think straight. But we need to sort this out. The employees are suspicious. Bernice almost left us to die because of the misunderstandings." "I said not now!" Leonard exploded, his voice filled with an anxiety he had never shown before. Evan recoiled, startled by the reaction. He realized that the trauma of the burial had affected his uncle much more deeply than he had imagined. The man who always solved everything could now barely take care of himself. It was at that moment that a loud knock on the door interrupted their thoughts. Martha appeared with a worried expression. "Mr. Montgomery, there's a woman here who wants to talk to Evan. She said it's urgent." Evan frowned. "A woman? What's she like?" "About 40, dark hair, too thin. She said her name is Valderine." The name hit Evan like a lightning bolt. Valderine was a ghost from the past that he had tried to keep buried. Her presence here could only mean one thing: his secrets were about to come to light. Evan felt the blood run cold in his veins when he heard the name Valderine. 23 years of life, and for the past 5 he had managed to keep this ghost from the past, far away from the estate and from Leonard. Now she was here, at the door of the main house at the worst possible moment. "Tell her that I can't see her now," Evan murmured, running his trembling hands through his dirt-covered hair. Martha noticed the radical change in the young man's expression. "Son, you've gone pale. Who is this woman?" Before Evan could answer, firm footsteps echoed through the hallway. Valderine had passed Martha and entered the house uninvited. She was a 44-year-old woman, visibly emaciated, with worn but clean clothes. Her dark eyes had a disturbing intensity, and there was a desperate urgency in her that was evident in every movement. "Evan," she said, stopping at the bedroom door. "We need to talk, now." Leonard, who was still struggling with his shirt buttons due to the trembling in his hands, looked from his nephew to the stranger. "Who are you? How did you get into my house?" "I'm Valderine Costa," she replied, without taking her eyes off Evan. "And I have some matters to resolve with your nephew." The way she spoke the word nephew carried an irony that didn't go unnoticed by Leonard. There was something there that he didn't understand, a subtext that made him uneasy. "Valderine, this isn't the time for this," said Evan, trying to sound firm but failing miserably. "We've had an accident, we're hurt." "I know about the accident," she interrupted. "The whole town is already talking, but my situation can't wait any longer." Martha, sensing the tension in the air, discreetly left the room and returned to the kitchen, where Daisy was finishing her breakfast. The girl had managed to relax a little in the cozy atmosphere of the kitchen, but still showed signs of the previous morning's trauma. "Mrs. Martha," said Daisy, looking out the window, "did my aunt leave?" "Yes, honey. She needed some time to think about the things she did." "Is she coming back for me?" Martha paused in washing the dishes. The girl's simple question touched her deeply. "Do you want her to come back?" Daisy thought for a moment. "I don't know. She gets mad at me sometimes. But she's the only family I have." "Sometimes family isn't just who has the same blood, honey," Martha said gently. "Sometimes family is who takes care of you with love." Back in the bedroom, the conversation between Evan and Valderine had taken a turn that left Leonard increasingly confused and worried. "You promised you'd keep helping me," Valderine said, her voice growing in desperation. "You said you'd understand my situation." "I helped as much as I could," replied Evan, avoiding looking at Leonard. "But I can't anymore. Things are complicated here." "Complicated?" Valderine laughed bitterly. "Do you think your complications are worse than a degenerative disease? Do you know how much my treatment costs?" Leonard stood up abruptly, the sudden movement making him dizzy for a moment. "What treatment? What are you two talking about?" The silence that followed was filled with tension. Evan knew that the time had come to reveal secrets he had kept for years, but he didn't know how to begin. "Uncle," he said finally, "there are some things I've never told you." "What kind of things?" Valderine lost patience. "He never told you that I'm his mother?" The revelation hit Leonard like a punch to the stomach. He staggered and had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. "What?" "That's right," continued Valderine, now with tears in her eyes. "Evan is my son. The son I abandoned as a baby on the church steps 23 years ago." Memories came flooding back to Leonard like an avalanche. He remembered perfectly that Sunday morning when he found a baby crying on the steps of the Harmony Creek Community Church. He was newborn, wrapped in a simple blue blanket, with just a note that read, "Please take care of him." Leonard, who had never been able to have children with his deceased wife, saw in that baby a gift from Providence. He informally adopted Evan, raising him as if he were his own blood, giving him his last name, his opportunities, all his paternal love. "You," murmured Leonard, looking at Evan with a mixture of shock and hurt. "You found your biological mother and never told me?" "She found me," corrected Evan, his voice choked with emotion, 5 years ago. "She showed up saying she was sick, that she needed help with treatment. And you decided to help her at my expense?" Leonard's voice rose, a rage that he hadn't felt in years beginning to boil in his chest. "She was my mother. I couldn't let her die." "I'm your father," Leonard shouted, completely losing control. "I raised you. I gave you everything. And you stole from me to help the woman who abandoned you?" The accusation of theft hung in the air like a sword. Valderine looked from one man to the other, realizing that she had unleashed an emotional storm that was beyond her control. "Evan never stole anything," she said, trying to defend him. "He only used what was rightfully his." "Rightfully his?" Leonard laughed bitterly. "What right? He works on the farm, yes, but the company, the property, all of this is mine. I built it with sweat and blood." It was then that Evan revealed something that made the situation even worse. "I sold parts of the plantation," he said quietly. "Small lots that you never visited. I used the money to pay for her treatment." The silence that followed was deadly. Leonard looked at Evan as if he were seeing a stranger. The young man he had raised since he was a baby, whom he considered his son at heart, had sold parts of his property without his knowledge. "How many parts?" asked Leonard, his voice dangerously low. About 5 or 6, admitted Evan. 5 or 6 lots?" Leonard's voice rose again. "You sold almost 10% of the property?" Valderine realized that the situation was getting out of control. "Leonard, please try to understand. I was desperate. The illness." "What illness exactly?" asked Leonard, his sharp mind working even through the anger. "You seem quite healthy for someone with a degenerative disease." The question caught Valdirene off guard. She hesitated for a few seconds, enough time for both Leonard and Evan to realize that there was something wrong with her story. "It's a disease internal," she said vaguely. "It affects the nervous system." "What doctor is treating you? What hospital?" insisted Leonard. "That doesn't matter now," replied Valdirene, avoiding the question. "What matters is that I need to continue treatment, and Evan promised to help me." At that moment, Martha appeared at the bedroom door with a worried expression. "Mr. Montgomery, sorry to interrupt, but more people are arriving. It seems the news of the accident has spread." Outside, the voices of workers and neighbors could be heard. The property was filling up with curious and concerned people. In a small community like that, news traveled quickly. "Evan," said Leonard, his voice now cold and controlled, "you're coming with me to talk to these people. You're going to explain to everyone what you did with our property." "Uncle, please, don't call me uncle," Leonard exploded again. "You sold my land, my life, to a woman who abandoned you as a baby." Valdirene took a step forward, trying to mediate. "Leonard, you're being unfair. Evan was just trying to do the right thing." "The right thing would have been to talk to me," he replied. "The right thing would have been to trust me, as I have always trusted him." While the three adults argued in the room, Daisy watched from the kitchen window as people gathered in the yard. There were workers, neighbors, and even some local authorities. Everyone was talking at the same time, creating an anxious buzz. The girl didn't fully understand what was happening, but she realized that the situation was getting more and more tense. She remembered her grandpa's words about doing the right thing, and wondered if her decision to seek help had ended up creating even bigger problems for everyone. Martha approached her and placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry, honey. Adults sometimes need to argue to solve their problems." "They're very angry," observed Daisy. "Yes, they are. But sometimes you need to get angry to make amends properly later." From the room came another explosion of voices. The discussion between Leonard, Evan, and Valdirene had reached a critical point. And now the entire community was gathered outside, waiting for answers about the future of their lives and jobs. The yard of the property was teeming with more than 40 people when Leonard finally left the main house. Workers who depended on the farm to support their families, neighbors worried about the rumors about the sale of the property, and even Father Anthony from the local church were present. Everyone wanted to understand what was really happening with the Montgomery farm. Evan followed a few steps behind Leonard, his face pale and his eyes red. The weight of the disappointment he had caused in the man he considered his father was destroying him from within. Valdirene remained in the house, watching from the window, aware that her presence could make the situation even worse. "Mr. Montgomery," shouted Ben, one of the oldest workers on the farm, "is it true that you're going to sell the property? What's going to happen to us?" An anxious murmur ran through the crowd. Leonard raised his hands, asking for silence, but his own hands were trembling visibly. The trauma of the burial had left scars that went beyond the fear of enclosed spaces. There was an emotional fragility that he had never experienced before. "I'm not going to sell the property," he said, his voice weaker than normal. "I never said I was going to sell." "But the rumors," insisted Mary Carmen, one of the workers from the processing plant. "Everyone is saying that you're having financial difficulties." Leonard looked at Evan, who lowered his head. It was impossible to explain the real situation without revealing the betrayal he had suffered. How could he tell those people that the young man he trusted most had sold parts of the property without his knowledge? "The farm's finances have undergone some adjustments," Leonard said carefully, "but that doesn't mean you're going to lose your jobs." Father Anthony, an elderly and respected man in the community, approached. "Leonard, my son, can I talk to you in private?" "Now is not the time, Father." "I think it's exactly the time," insisted the religious man. 23 years ago, you came to my church seeking advice on how to raise an abandoned baby. Maybe it's time for us to talk again." The mention of the abandoned baby made Leonard stiffen. Father Anthony knew about Evan's origin. He had been the one who guided the informal adoption process. The presence of the priest there was no coincidence. Meanwhile, in the kitchen of the main house, Daisy watched everything from the window with wide eyes. Martha prepared lunch for the workers, a task she performed mechanically while trying to process everything that had happened that morning. "Mrs. Martha," said Daisy, "why is everyone angry?" "Because sometimes adults keep secrets, honey, and when the secrets come out, everyone gets confused." "I have a secret too," said Daisy softly. Martha stopped cutting the vegetables and looked at the girl. "What secret, my dear?" "I know where my mom is." The revelation surprised Martha completely. All morning she had assumed that Daisy's mother had simply abandoned her daughter, as sometimes happened in very poor families. "Where is she, honey?" "She works in a big house in the city. A rich lady who has lots of little kids." Daisy paused, her words coming out slowly. "My mom said she was going to earn money so we could have a better house. She said she'd be back in 2 months. How long has she been gone?" "I can't count very well," admitted Daisy. "But it's been many days, many, many days." Martha felt her heart tighten. The child had been abandoned by a mother who had probably found a better job and decided that a small daughter would be an obstacle. It was a sad but common story in the region. Outside, the situation was getting more tense. Sam had joined the group and was recounting details of the rescue that made everyone even more worried. "They were trapped all night," he said, "and no one went looking. If it hadn't been for Bernice's girl, they could have died in there." The mention of Bernice brought more complications. Some workers had noticed her strange behavior during the morning, and now they were starting to ask uncomfortable questions. "Where's Bernice?" asked Connie, one of the neighbors. "Why didn't she come to work today?" Evan finally found the courage to speak. "Bernice, she's had some personal problems. She'll need a few days to sort things out." "What kind of problems?" insisted Ben. The question went unanswered, because at that moment Valderine came out of the house, tired of waiting. Her presence caused an immediate stir among those present, who didn't recognize her, but realized that she didn't belong to that community. "Who are you?" asked Mary Carmen directly. "I'm Evan's mother," replied Valderine, with a simplicity that shocked everyone. The silence that followed was absolute. The entire community knew that Evan had been found as a baby on the church steps, raised by Leonard as an adopted son. The appearance of a biological mother after 23 years was something that no one expected. Father Anthony was the first to recover from the shock. "Valderine Costa," he said, as if trying to remember something. "You were the daughter of the late John Costa, who had a small farm near the river." "Yes, Father," she confirmed, looking uncomfortable with the recognition. "You disappeared from the region when you were very young. Your family searched for you for years." "I had my reasons for leaving," replied Valderine defensively. "And now you're back," observed the priest, his voice filled with a wisdom acquired in decades dealing with the human dramas of his parish. "After all this time, you've come back exactly when Evan has become a responsible man with access to the resources of the farm." The insinuation didn't go unnoticed by anyone. Murmurs began to circulate among those present. Valderine realized that she was losing control of the narrative. "I came back because I'm sick," she said, raising her voice. "I need expensive medical treatment, and my son decided to help me." "What illness?" asked Connie, who had worked as a nurse in the town's small hospital before retiring. "You don't look sick." "It's an internal illness," replied Valderine, repeating the vague explanation she had given before. "Internal how?" insisted Connie. "Cancer, heart problem, diabetes." The specific questions made Valderine visibly nervous. She looked at Evan for support, but the young man was dealing with his own issues. It was at that moment that something happened that no one expected. Daisy ran out of the house, past all the adults, and went straight to Valdirine. The girl studied her with the intense curiosity that only children possess. "You look like my mom," said Daisy suddenly. Valdirine looked down, seeing the child for the first time. "What do you mean, little one?" "You have the same way of looking when you're lying," said Daisy, with brutal, childish honesty. "My mom made that face when she said she'd be back soon." The girl's innocent comment echoed through the yard like a bombshell. Everyone present realized the similarity that Daisy had noticed. There was something in Valdirine's expression that suggested dishonesty. Martha ran after Daisy, worried that the girl might get into trouble. "Honey, come here. Let the adults talk." But Daisy hadn't finished. "Lady," she said to Valdirine, "are you lying about being sick?" The direct question from a 4-year-old had a devastating impact. Valdirine paled, Evan clenched his fists, and Leonard, for the first time since leaving the house, looked directly at the woman who claimed to be the mother of his adopted son. "Answer the girl's question," said Leonard, his voice dangerously low. "Are you lying about being sick?" The silence that followed lasted an eternity. 40 people awaited an answer that could change everything they thought they knew about the situation. Valdirine looked around, seeing the expectant faces, and realized that she had reached a point of no return. Her next words would define not only her future, but the fate of that entire community. The silence stretched for long seconds that seemed like hours. Valdirine looked at the expectant faces around her, realizing she was cornered. The simple question from a 4-year-old had exposed the fragility of her lies before an entire community. She began, but the words were lost in her throat. "Answer!" demanded Ben, his patience exhausted. "This farm has supported our families for generations. If you're deceiving Evan, we're all lost." Evan stepped forward, still trying to protect Valdirine. "Please, everyone, let's take it easy. She's going through a difficult time." "Difficult how?" interrupted Connie, her experience as a nurse surfacing. "Valdirine, tell me exactly what illness you have. What doctor is treating you? What hospital?" The specific questions made Valdirine physically recoil. Her hands began to tremble, and beads of sweat appeared on her forehead, despite the mild morning weather. It's complicated," she murmured. "Complicated isn't a disease," said Father Anthony firmly. "My daughter, please tell the truth. There are many lives at stake here." It was then that Valdirine broke down. The lies she had built over 5 years crumbled like a house of cards. "There is no illness," she whispered, so softly that only the people closest to her could hear. "What?" asked Evan, his face paling even further. "There is no illness," shouted Valdirine, now with tears streaming down her face. "There never was an illness. I made it all up." The impact of the confession was devastating. Evan staggered as if he had been punched. Leonard clenched his fists tightly, and indignant murmurs began to circulate among the workers. "Then what did you want the money for?" asked Evan, his voice broken by emotion. Valdirine covered her face with her hands, sobbing. I lost my job 2 years ago. I was working in a family's house in Kansas City, but the lady fired me when she found out I was taking money from her purse." "You were stealing?" asked Father Anthony, horrified. "It was just a little," Valdirine defended herself. "I needed to pay my debts, and then I started gambling. I thought I could earn money quickly in the games, but I only lost more." The full revelation left everyone in shock. Evan had sold parts of the family property to support the gambling addiction of a woman who had abandoned him as a baby. 5 years! shouted Evan, his voice filled with pain and anger. 5 years I believed you were dying. 5 years selling pieces of my father's land to pay for your lies. I'm your mother, Valdirine protested desperately. I carried you in my womb. You have an obligation to help me. Mother? Leonard laughed bitterly, stepping forward. A mother is someone who raises, who cares, who sacrifices for their child. You abandoned him on the church steps as if he were trash." The crowd began to murmur in agreement with Leonard. Several people had followed Evan's upbringing and knew the love and dedication that Leonard had invested in the boy. It was Daisy who once again made an observation that cut through all the tension. "She looks like Aunt Bernice when she makes excuses," said the girl, looking at Valdirene with childish curiosity. The comparison made Martha think. "Honey, what do you mean? Aunt Bernice always makes up stories when she doesn't want to work, or when she does something wrong, she makes the same face." Father Anthony observed the girl attentively. There was a natural wisdom in Daisy that was impressive. "Little one, you're very smart for your age. My grandpa said that children see things that adults don't, because adults think too much," replied Daisy simply. Leonard looked at the girl with renewed interest. Amid all that chaos, there was something comforting in her presence. Her direct honesty contrasted sharply with the lies he had discovered in his own family. "Evan," said Leonard, turning to the young man he had raised as his son, "how many lots exactly did you sell? And for how much?" Evan hesitated, knowing that the full truth would be even more painful. 7 lots, he finally admitted, for a total of $200,000 over the past 5 years. A shocked murmur ran through the crowd. It was an enormous amount for the standards of the rural community, enough money to support several families for years. $200,000 on gambling, said Ben, incredulous. "And we're here worrying about whether we'll have a job next month." Valdirene realized that she had completely lost everyone's sympathy. "You don't understand the pressure I was facing, the threats from the loan sharks, the debt growing." "No one asked you to gamble?" shouted Mary Carmen. "No one asked you to invent diseases? You ruined the life of your own son." The situation was getting completely out of control. Valdirene looked around, seeing only hostile faces, and made a desperate decision. "All right," she shouted. "All right, I'll leave, but I want one last thing before I go." "You're not in a position to demand anything," said Leonard coldly. "It's not a demand," said Valdirene, her voice gaining a strange intensity. "It's information. Information that will be very interesting to you." Evan frowned. "What information?" "About who really found Evan at the church," said Valdirene, a bitter smile appearing on her face. "About who knew the truth 23 years ago and never told." Leonard's blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" "Ask Bernice," said Valdirene. "Ask her who really found the baby at the church that Sunday morning." The revelation hit the group like lightning. Everyone knew that Bernice had been working on the property for 15 years, but she had only arrived in the region 8 years after Evan's birth. "That's impossible," said Father Anthony. "Bernice wasn't living here when Evan was found." "Wasn't she?" Valdirene laughed. "Then why does she have a gold bracelet with the initials EM that she's kept for 23 years? The silence that followed was absolute. Evan automatically reached for his chest, where a thin chain held a small medal that Leonard had given him when he turned 18. But before that medal, he vaguely remembered a little bracelet he wore as a child. "What bracelet?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The bracelet you wore as a baby," said Valdirene. "The bracelet I put on you before leaving you at the church." Martha stepped forward, her expression worried. "Valdirene, what are you trying to say?" "I'm saying that Bernice was there that morning. I'm saying that she saw everything. And I'm saying that there are far more secrets on this property than you imagine." Daisy, who had remained quiet during most of the discussion, suddenly pulled on Martha's skirt. "Mrs. Martha, Aunt Bernice has a little box under her bed. She never lets anyone touch it." All heads turned to the girl. "How do you know that, honey?" asked Martha. "Because I saw her when she was sleeping. She always looks at the box before sleeping, as if it were a treasure." Daisy's revelation added another layer of mystery to the already complex situation. If Bernice really had secrets kept for 23 years, it could completely change everyone's understanding of recent events. Leonard looked around at the worried faces of his community, then at Evan, whose eyes showed total confusion. and finally at Daisy, whose innocence was revealing truths that the adults had lost or hidden. "Where is Bernice now?" he asked. "No one knows," replied Sam. "She disappeared after the rescue this morning." "Then let's find her," decided Leonard, his voice regaining some of its usual authority. "And let's find out what other secrets are being kept in this community." The search for Bernice began immediately. Leonard organized the workers into small groups to search the entire property and the surrounding areas. Even with his recent trauma, he managed to recover some of his natural leadership in the face of the need to discover the truth. Daisy insisted on accompanying Martha to the makeshift house where she lived with her aunt. The girl knew all the possible hiding places and wanted to help find the mysterious little box she had mentioned. "Honey, are you sure you saw a box?" asked Martha as they walked along the path leading to the abandoned lot. "Yes, I'm sure," replied Daisy with conviction. "It's small, made of wood, and Aunt Bernice always hides it under the mattress when she thinks no one is watching." When they arrived at the precarious house, they found the door ajar, swinging in the wind. Bernice had left in a hurry, leaving her few clothes scattered on the floor and some belongings abandoned. Martha examined the environment carefully. It was even more precarious than she had imagined. Tin walls, dirt floor, an old mattress thrown in the corner. How had a 4-year-old child survived there for 2 months? "The box is here," said Daisy, pointing to the corner where the mattress was. Martha lifted the mattress and indeed found a small, dark wooden box hidden in a cavity in the floor. The box was old but well preserved, as if it were an object of special value. "Let's take it to show the others," decided Martha, picking up the box carefully. Meanwhile, on the other side of the property, Evan walked alone along the path leading to the river. He needed time to process everything he had discovered. 5 years of his life based on lies, $200,000 spent on gambling, and now the possibility that there were even more secrets about his origin. The tears that he had held back all morning finally began to flow. He felt betrayed not only by Valderine, but by himself. How had he been so naive? How hadn't he questioned the story of the illness more deeply? It was then that he heard footsteps behind him. Leonard approached, walking slowly, still dealing with the physical and emotional effects of the trauma. "Can I walk with you?" asked Leonard. Evan nodded without looking at the man who had raised him. They walked in silence for a few minutes until they reached the riverbank, where a large stone served as a natural seat. "Uncle," began Evan, but Leonard interrupted him. "I'm still your uncle," he said firmly. "It doesn't matter what we discovered today. You've been my son for 23 years, and that's not going to change. But I betrayed your trust," said Evan, his voice filled with guilt. "I sold parts of the land that you built with so much effort." "You did," agreed Leonard, "and it was wrong. But you did it because you believed you were saving your mother's life. I can understand the motives, even if I don't agree with the methods." Evan finally looked at Leonard. "How can you forgive me?" "Because you're my son," replied Leonard simply, "and fathers forgive their sons, even when they make serious mistakes." The conversation was interrupted by shouts coming from the direction of the main house. Sam was running towards them, waving urgently. "Mr. Montgomery, Evan, you need to come see what Martha found." The 2 men ran back to the house, where they found a group gathered around the kitchen table. Martha was in the center, with the wooden box open before her, and her expression showed a mixture of shock and understanding. "What is it?" asked Leonard, approaching the table. Martha raised a small gold bracelet. It was delicate, clearly made for a baby, and had the initials E.M. engraved in small letters. "This is the bracelet that Valderine mentioned," said Martha. "But that's not all." She showed other items from the box, some old photographs, a time-yellowed note, and a small, faded blue blanket. "This blanket," murmured Leonard, picking it up carefully. "It's the blanket that Evan was wrapped in when I found him at the church." Evan approached, touching the soft fabric. It was strange to have a concrete object from his earliest moments of life, something that connected his present to the past he had never known. "There's more," said Martha, picking up the yellowed note. "This note isn't the one that was with Evan at the church." "What do you mean?" asked Father Anthony, who had arrived with the others. "The note that was with Evan only said, 'Please take care of him,'" explained Leonard. "I kept that note. This one is different." Martha opened the paper carefully and read aloud. "Bernice, you promised you would take care of him if anything happened to me. Keep this bracelet as proof that he is my son. One day, when he grows up, tell him the truth. Valdirine." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. The note suggested a much deeper connection between Bernice and Valdirine than anyone had imagined. "They knew each other," said Evan slowly. "Bernice and Valdirine knew each other 23 years ago." Daisy, who had remained quiet watching the adults, suddenly spoke. "Aunt Bernice sometimes talks in her sleep. She says a name Valdinia." Everyone looked at the girl. "Valdinia?" repeated Martha. "Yeah, she says, 'Sorry, Valdinia,' and 'I tried to take care of him, Valdinia.'" Daisy's revelation added another piece to the puzzle. Valdinia was clearly a term of endearment for Valdirine, suggesting that the two women had a close relationship. "There's one more thing," said Martha, picking up the photographs from the box. "These photos are of Bernice when she was younger, and in one of them, she showed a faded photograph where two teenagers smiled at the camera. One was clearly Bernice, about 15 years younger. The other was Valdirine, also much younger. They were friends," said Father Anthony, studying the photo, "or maybe even relatives." Evan took the photograph, observing the two young women who seemed so happy and carefree. It was difficult to reconcile that image with the troubled women he had known. "We need to find Bernice," said Leonard with determination. "She has the answers we need." It was at that moment that Ben arrived, running, breathless. "Mr. Montgomery, we found her. Bernice is at the church." "At the church?" repeated Father Anthony, surprised. "Yes, Father. She's kneeling at the altar crying. She doesn't want to talk to anyone. She just says she wants confession." The group exchanged meaningful glances. Bernice had chosen the community's most sacred place to finally reveal her secrets. It was almost as if she knew there was no more escaping the truth. "Let's all go," decided Leonard. "This story needs to end where it began, at the church where Evan was found." As the group headed to the Harmony Creek Community Church, Daisy walked beside Martha, holding her hand confidently. The girl had become an essential part of that search for the truth, her innocent observations revealing secrets that the adults had lost or hidden. "Mrs. Martha," said Daisy as they walked, "do you think they'll stop fighting now?" "I hope so, honey," replied Martha. "Sometimes people need to tell all their secrets before they can make amends." "And after they tell the secrets, can I keep living with you?" The question touched Martha deeply. During that chaotic day, she had become attached to that brave and insightful girl. The idea of returning her to a life of neglect was unbearable. "We'll talk about that after we sort everything out," promised Martha. "But I promise you won't be left helpless." When they arrived at the church, they found Bernice exactly as Ben had described, kneeling before the altar, sobbing softly. Her hands trembled as she held an old rosary, and she murmured prayers between the tears. Father Anthony approached first, his gentle voice echoing through the empty nave. "Bernice, my daughter, we're all here. It's time to talk." Bernice raised her tear-stained face and looked at the gathered group. When her eyes met Daisy's, she began to cry even harder. "I'm so sorry, child," she said. "I'm so sorry for everything." The atmosphere in the Harmony Creek Community Church was filled with tension and anticipation. Bernice remained kneeling before the altar, her hands trembling as she held the rosary. The group positioned themselves in the nearby pews, respecting the sacred space but eager for the revelations that were to come. Father Anthony approached Bernice and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "My daughter, you said you wanted to make a confession. We're all here because we need to understand the truth." Bernice raised her red and swollen eyes, looking at each person present. When her gaze landed on Evan, she sobbed even harder. "I never wanted it to come to this," she said in a broken voice. "I never thought the secrets I've kept for so long would cause so much suffering." "Bernice," said Leonard, his voice gentler than it had been all morning, "tell us what really happened 23 years ago." Bernice wiped her face with the back of her hand and took a deep breath, as if gathering courage for a confession that had been waiting for decades. "Valdirene was my best friend when we were teenagers," she began. "We grew up together here in the community. She lived with her father, John Costa, in a little house near the river." "I remember John," said Father Anthony. "He was a hard-working man, but he had a lot of problems with drinking after his wife passed away." "Exactly," confirmed Bernice. "And when Valdirene got pregnant at 19, he kicked her out of the house. He said she had dishonored the family." Evan leaned forward, absorbing every word. This was the first time he had heard details about the circumstances of his birth. "Who was the baby's father?" asked Martha. Bernice hesitated, looking nervously around. It was a married man, someone important in the region. Valdirene never told me his name, but she was always very clear that he would never take responsibility for the child." "And you helped her during the pregnancy?" asked Leonard. "I did. She stayed hidden in my house for the last 3 months. My parents had also passed away, so I lived alone in a little house in the back of the property where my family had worked for years." Daisy, who had remained quiet until then, suddenly spoke. "Aunt Bernice, why didn't you ever tell me you had a friend?" The girl's innocent question made Bernice cry even harder. "Because I'm ashamed of what I did, child. Very ashamed." "What did you do?" asked Evan, his voice tense. Bernice looked directly at him, and when she spoke, her voice was filled with a guilt she had carried for more than 2 decades. "When you were born, Valdirene had a very serious hemorrhage. I didn't know what to do. I was desperate. I ran to get help, but when I returned with the midwife, Valdirene was unconscious and very weak." "And then?" insisted Father Anthony. "The midwife said that Valdirene might not survive, that she needed urgent medical care at the hospital in the big city. But Valdirene, in the moments when she was conscious, only repeated one thing, that she couldn't keep the baby." Bernice paused, wiping away the tears that wouldn't stop flowing. "She made me promise that, if something happened to her, I would take you to a safe place. She said that you deserved a real family, not a single mother without resources in a community that rejected her." "But she survived," observed Martha. "She survived, yes, but barely. She was very ill for weeks. And when she finally got better, she had made a decision. She said she was leaving the region forever, that she was going to try to rebuild her life far from here." Evan felt as if he were listening to someone else's story. "And she asked you to abandon me at the church?" "It wasn't abandonment," protested Bernice. "It was a plan. Valdirene knew that your Leonard attended church every Sunday. She knew that he was a good man with resources, without children. She believed that it would be the best chance for you to have a good life." The revelation left Leonard speechless. Discovering that he had been specifically chosen to raise Evan completely changed his perspective on what he had always considered a chance encounter. "But why did you keep the bracelet and the other things?" he asked. "Because Valdirene asked me to," replied Bernice. "She said that maybe one day she would come back to find you, or that you might want to know your true story. The things in the box were proof that she really was your mother." "And why didn't you ever tell me this?" asked Evan, his voice filled with hurt. "Because Valdirene made me swear that I would only tell you if she died, or if you came to me asking about your origins. And you never asked. You seemed happy being Leonard's son." Daisy, who had been listening to everything carefully, suddenly asked a question that caught everyone off guard. "Aunt Bernice, if you promised to take care of Evan, why didn't you take care of me when my mom left?" The girl's simple question exposed a painful contradiction in Bernice's story. If she had sacrificed so much to ensure Evan's well-being as a baby, why had she neglected Daisy so much? Bernice covered her face with her hands, sobbing. Because I was afraid, she finally admitted. When Valderine came back 5 years ago, I panicked. I thought she was going to take you away, that she was going to tell everyone that I had lied about how you were found. Lied how? Asked Father Anthony. I never said I was at the church that morning. I let everyone think that your Leonard had found Evan by chance. But I was there. I placed him on the church steps and hid to make sure someone would find him. My God, murmured Martha. You watched everything? I did. I saw when your Leonard arrived for the 6 o'clock Mass. I saw when he found the baby. I saw the look of surprise and then tenderness when he picked Evan up. Leonard felt strange knowing that he had been observed in that intimate moment. And then? Then I left the region for a few years. I went to work in other cities, trying to forget everything that had happened. But I always felt guilty for having lied, for having kept secrets. And when you came back to work on the property, asked Evan, I came back because I wanted to be close to you. I wanted to make sure you were okay, that I had made the right decision. And during all those years, seeing you grow up happy and safe, I believed that I had done the right thing. Until Valderine appeared, said Leonard. Exactly. When she appeared 5 years ago, everything changed. She was desperate, addicted to gambling, needing money, and she blackmailed me. Blackmailed how? Asked Evan, feeling a new wave of anger. She said that if I didn't help her get closer to you, she would tell the whole truth. She would tell you that you weren't abandoned by chance, that everything was planned. She knew that this could destroy your relationship with your Leonard. The final revelation left everyone in silence. Valderine had not only lied about the illness, she had blackmailed Bernice to gain access to Evan. That's why you didn't want me to get help when they were trapped, said Daisy, finally understanding. You were afraid of Valderine. I was, child. But when I saw you determined to do the right thing, I realized that I had become a bad person. A person who let children go hungry, who left people trapped in a hole for fear of losing a job. Bernice turned to Daisy, her tears flowing freely. You showed me what I had become. A 4-year-old child had more courage and kindness than I had in 23 years. The silence in the church was broken only by Bernice's sobs and the distant sound of the wind swaying the trees outside. Everyone processed the complex revelations they had just heard. It was Evan who broke the silence. Bernice, during all these years, you could have told me the truth. I would have understood. I know that now, she replied. But back then, I thought I was protecting you. And then, when Valderine came back, I was protecting myself. Leonard stood up and walked to the altar where Bernice remained kneeling. Bernice, look at me. She raised her red eyes. You made serious mistakes, he said. You lied, kept secrets, neglected a child. But you also made a courageous choice 23 years ago that gave Evan a good life. And now? She asked in a whisper. Now, said Leonard, looking at the whole family gathered in the church, we're going to decide together how to repair the damage and build something better for everyone. 3 weeks had passed since the revelations in the church, and the Montgomery property was undergoing a silent but profound transformation. The torrential storms that had battered the region for 8 months had finally given a respite, allowing both the land and the people to begin a healing process. Leonard was on the porch of the main house, watching Daisy play in the garden with a rag doll that Martha had made for her. The girl had officially moved into the main house, occupying a small but cozy room that was close to Martha's. The arrangement had happened naturally. No one questioned when the cook simply declared that the child would be under her care. "How are you feeling today?" asked Martha, approaching the porch with a cup of coffee. "Better," replied Leonard, accepting the hot drink. "I managed to go into the office for almost 2 hours yesterday. It's not much, but it's progress." The trauma of claustrophobia still haunted him, but with regular sessions with a psychologist from the neighboring town, he was gradually regaining his ability to work in enclosed spaces. The grain processing company had suffered from his absence, but Evan was proving to be a natural administrator. And Evan? "How is he dealing with everything?" asked Martha. Leonard sighed. "He's working double to compensate for the financial problems. He sold his car, he's renegotiating the lots that were sold illegally, and he's been spending entire days trying to win back the customers we lost." The financial situation of the property was complicated, but not irreversible. Of the 7 lots sold by Evan, 3 had been recovered through agreements with the buyers. The other 4 were being renegotiated, with Evan paying heavy fines but managing to keep the land in the family. Daisy dropped the doll and ran to the porch. "Mr. Montgomery, Mrs. Martha said that today I'm going to meet my real mom." Leonard's heart tightened. After weeks of discreet investigation, they had finally located Daisy's mother. She worked as a domestic in a mansion in Kansas City, taking care of the children of a wealthy family. What they discovered about the situation had been painful but enlightening. "Are you excited?" he asked gently. "I am," replied Daisy, but there was a hesitation in her voice that didn't go unnoticed by the adults. "But can I keep living here afterwards?" "We'll talk about that when she arrives," said Martha, hugging the girl. Daisy's mother, Connie Santos, had agreed to come to the property that afternoon. The initial phone conversation had been tense. She seemed more concerned with justifying herself than properly eager to see her daughter again. Around 3 in the afternoon, a bus stopped on the main road, and a woman of about 30 got off carrying a small suitcase. She was thin, tired, with simple but clean clothes. She walked slowly towards the property, as if each step were an effort. Daisy saw her first. "It's her!" she shouted, but didn't run out like a child normally would. Instead, she hid behind Martha, watching. Connie stopped at the property gate, looking around with an expression that mixed nervousness and something that seemed like resentment. When she saw Daisy, she forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hi, honey," she said, but her voice sounded strange, as if she were talking to a distant acquaintance. "Hi, Mom," replied Daisy timidly. Leonard and Martha approached, making formal introductions. Connie seemed uncomfortable with the relative elegance of the property, constantly adjusting her clothes and avoiding direct eye contact. "Thank you for taking care of Daisy," she said, but the tone suggested more social obligation than genuine gratitude. "It was a pleasure," replied Martha. "She's a special girl." "Yes, she's always been independent," said Connie strangely. They sat on the porch to talk, with Daisy playing nearby, but clearly listening to every word. The story that Connie told confirmed everyone's suspicions. "I got a very good job in Kansas City," she explained. "The family pays well, gives me room and board, but they don't allow employees with children. So I thought it would be temporary, that in a few months I would be able to settle down and get Daisy." "A few months turned into 2 years," observed Leonard gently. "Things got complicated," Connie defended herself. "The lady liked my work, gave me extra responsibilities. I take care of her 3 children as if they were my own. I can't just drop everything." Martha exchanged a meaningful look with Leonard. It was clear that Connie had found a comfortable situation in Kansas City and didn't want to give it up to take responsibility for raising her own daughter. "And now?" asked Leonard. "Have you come to get Daisy?" Connie hesitated, looking at the daughter who pretended to play but was obviously paying attention to the conversation. "Actually," she said slowly, "I came to propose an agreement." "What kind of agreement?" asked Martha, feeling a growing tension. "You've clearly become attached to the girl, and she seems to be doing well here. Maybe it's better for everyone if she stays. I could visit her from time to time, send some money when possible." The proposal left everyone in shock. Connie was essentially offering to sell her daughter in exchange for the convenience of keeping her job in Kansas City. Daisy stopped playing and looked directly at her mother. "Mom, don't you want me to live with you?" The child's direct question made Connie visibly uncomfortable. "Honey, it's complicated. Where I live, there's no space for you, and you're doing so well here. But you're my mom, said Daisy, her voice small but clear. "I am, and I always will be. But sometimes mothers need to make difficult choices." Martha could no longer contain her indignation. "Connie, you're talking about abandoning your daughter permanently." "It's not abandonment," protested Connie. "It's what's best for her. Look at this place, these people. Daisy will have opportunities here that I could never give her." "Opportunities don't replace a mother's love," said Leonard firmly. "And who said I don't love my daughter?" Connie raised her voice. "I'm here, aren't I? I could have simply disappeared and never come back." Daisy began to cry silently, tears streaming down her small face. The adults' discussion was confirming her worst fears. Her mother really didn't want her. It was at that moment that Evan arrived from the field, covered in dirt, after a day supervising the repairs in the areas damaged by the rains. When he saw the scene, a stranger clearly agitated, Daisy crying, and everyone with tense expressions, he immediately realized that something was wrong. "What's happening?" he asked. "This is Connie, Daisy's mother," explained Martha quickly. Evan looked at the woman, then at Daisy, and something in his expression changed. There was a cold anger growing in his eyes, an anger that everyone recognized as similar to the one he had felt when he discovered Valderine's lies. "Let me understand," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "You abandoned your daughter for 2 years, left her living on the streets scavenging trash to survive, and now you want to negotiate as if she were property?" "You don't understand the situation," began Connie. "I understand perfectly," interrupted Evan. "I understand because I was also abandoned. The difference is that my biological mother, at least, had the decency to give me to people who knew they were going to love me." The comparison hit Connie hard. "It's not the same thing." "It's exactly the same thing," said Evan, crouching beside Daisy and wiping away her tears. "With one difference, you're trying to convince yourself that it's out of love, when in reality it's out of convenience." Daisy looked at Evan with admiration. It was the first time someone had defended her feelings so directly and clearly. "Evan's right," said Leonard, standing up. "Connie, you need to make a decision. Either you take responsibility for being a real mother, or you legally relinquish custody so that other people can give Daisy the love she deserves." Leonard's ultimatum hung in the air like a sentence. Connie looked around, seeing the determined faces of the adults and the hopeful eyes of her daughter, and realized that she had reached a decisive moment that would define the rest of their lives. The silence on the porch stretched for long minutes as Connie processed Leonard's ultimatum. Daisy had stopped crying, but remained glued to Evan, finding comfort in the presence of the young man who had defended her feelings so vehemently. "I need to think," said Connie finally, avoiding looking directly at her daughter. "There's nothing to think about," replied Martha with a firmness that surprised everyone. "A mother who truly loves doesn't need to think about choosing her own child." "You don't have children. You don't know what it's like," retorted Connie defensively. "I don't have biological children," corrected Martha, pulling Daisy closer. "But I know what it's like to love a child enough to sacrifice anything for her." The tension was escalating dangerously when an unexpected distraction appeared. Bernice appeared at the entrance to the property, walking slowly with a small suitcase in her hand. In the 3 weeks since the confessions in the church, she had been living in town, working as a day laborer and trying to save money to start a new life somewhere else. "Bernice," said Leonard, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "I came to say goodbye," she replied, approaching the group. "I got a job on a farm in Missouri. I'm leaving early tomorrow." When she saw Connie, Bernice stopped abruptly. There was something familiar about that woman, something that made old memories resurface in her mind. "Connie Santos?" asked Bernice, incredulous. Connie looked at her, frowning. "Bernice? Bernice Silva? You worked on the Montgomery farm when I was a child?" "I did," confirmed Bernice. "You're the daughter of the late Anthony Santos, who had that small property near the border." "That's me," said Connie, seeming uncomfortable with the recognition. Daisy watched the interaction between the two women with curiosity. "Aunt Bernice, do you know my mum?" Bernice looked at Daisy, then at Connie, and something in her expression changed drastically. "Your mum," she repeated slowly. "Connie, this is your daughter." "It is," confirmed Connie, not understanding why the revelation seemed to have impacted Bernice so much. Bernice approached Daisy, studying the girl's face with intense attention. "Child, how old are you?" "4," replied Daisy. "And when were you born?" Connie intervened, clearly annoyed with the questions. "Why does this matter?" But Bernice wasn't paying attention to Connie. She was calculating dates in her head, and the more she thought, the paler she became. "Connie," she said in a trembling voice, "who is Daisy's father?" "That's none of your business," replied Connie brusquely. "It is," insisted Bernice, and there was a desperate urgency in her voice. "Please, I need to know. It's very important." Leonard realized that something significant was happening. "Bernice, what are you thinking?" Bernice looked at Evan, then at Daisy, and the similarities she had begun to notice became impossible to ignore. The shape of the eyes, the shape of the face, the way the girl tilted her head when she thought. "Connie," said Bernice, her voice now firm, "is Daisy's father the same man who was Evan's father?" The question hit the group like lightning. Connie paled completely, her eyes widening in panic. What are you insinuating?" she stammered. "I'm not insinuating anything," said Bernice. "I'm asking directly. Do Daisy and Evan have the same father?" The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone looked at Connie, who seemed to be struggling to decide whether to lie or confess a truth she had kept for 5 years. Evan stood up slowly, still holding Daisy's hand. "Connie, answer the question." I don't." Connie tried to form words, but her voice failed. It was Daisy who broke the silence. "Mom, is Evan my brother?" The 4-year-old child's innocent question forced a response that Connie could no longer avoid. "Yes," she whispered, tears beginning to flow. "Yes, you have the same father." The revelation hit everyone like an explosion. Evan staggered, needing to lean against the porch railing. Leonard covered his face with his hands. Martha looked at Daisy with an expression of shock and sudden understanding. "My God," murmured Bernice. "That's why she seemed familiar. That's why I felt like I already knew her." Evan looked at Daisy with new eyes. The girl he had defended, who had become important to him in recent weeks, was his sister. Blood sister. "Who is the father?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Connie hesitated once more, but realized that there was no more escaping the truth. "Dr. Robert Silvera," she said finally. "The doctor who had a practice in town. He's married, has children. When I got pregnant, he gave me money and told me never to contact him again." Evan vaguely remembered Dr. Silvera, a respected man in the community who had moved to the capital a few years ago when he retired. "Does he know about Daisy?" asked Leonard. "No," replied Connie. "When I found out I was pregnant, he had already moved, and even if he knew, it wouldn't make a difference. He made it very clear that he didn't want to be bothered." Daisy looked at Evan with bright eyes. "So you really are my brother?" "I am," replied Evan, kneeling to be at her level. "I'm your real brother." "And that means I won't be alone?" she asked hopefully. The question broke the heart of everyone present. Evan hugged Daisy tightly, making a promise he knew he would keep. "It means you'll never be alone again," he said. "Never again." Connie watched the scene, realizing that she had lost any chance of rebuilding a relationship with her daughter. Daisy had found not only a family, but a brother who would protect her in the same way that Leonard had protected him. "Connie," said Leonard, his voice gentler now that he understood the complexity of the situation, "do you still want to take Daisy away?" Connie looked at her daughter, nestled in her brother's arms, surrounded by people who clearly loved her, and finally admitted the truth to herself. "No," she said softly. "She's better off here. She always has been." "So you're going to relinquish custody?" asked Martha. "I am," confirmed Connie, tears flowing freely now. But I want to be able to visit her sometimes. I want her to know that I love her, even if I'm not able to take care of her properly. Daisy broke free from Evan and walked to her mother. Mom, you can visit me whenever you want, and I'll understand if you can't come all the time. The child's maturity in the face of the situation deeply touched everyone present. Connie hugged her daughter, perhaps for the first time with true maternal love. "You're wiser than your mother," she said, crying. "Forgive Mom for not having been better." "I forgive you," said Daisy simply. "Grandpa said that forgiving makes the heart lighter." Bernice, who had watched the whole scene, approached Evan. "Now I understand why I felt so connected to Daisy from the first moment. Something inside me knew that you were family." "And now?" asked Evan. "Are you still leaving?" Bernice looked at Leonard, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "I think I still have some wrongs to right here before starting over somewhere else." As the sun began to set, Connie prepared to return to Kansas City. She had signed the preliminary papers transferring legal guardianship of Daisy to Martha, with Leonard as financial guarantor and Evan as tutor. "Mom," said Daisy at the time of farewell, "are you going to be okay?" "I will, honey. And you will too. Now you have a real family." Daisy waved to her mother as she got on the bus, then ran back to the house where Evan and Martha were waiting for her. For the first time in her life, she was sure that she would not be abandoned again. That night, as Martha put Daisy to bed, the girl asked a question that showed how she had understood the magnitude of the changes in her life. "Mrs. Martha, now that I have a brother, does that mean I also have a father at heart?" "It does, my dear," replied Martha. "Your Leonard will take care of you as he took care of Evan." "And are you going to be my mother at heart?" "If you want me to," said Martha, moved. "I do," said Daisy, closing her eyes with a smile. "Now I have a complete family." 2 months had passed since the discovery that Daisy and Evan were siblings, and the Montgomery property was experiencing a stability that no one had felt in years. The rainy season had finally ended, allowing the necessary repairs to be completed and grain production to return to normal. Daisy had transformed into a completely different child. Her hair now shone with proper care, her cheeks had gained a healthy color, and above all, her eyes radiated the security of someone who had finally found her place in the world. She followed Evan around the farm like a loving shadow, absorbing knowledge about agriculture and management that a child her age normally wouldn't have. "Brother Evan," she said one morning as she watched him check the grain plants, "why do some plants grow more than others?" "Because some receive more sunlight, others have better soil," Evan explained patiently. "It's like people. Each one needs different things to grow well." "And me? What do I need to grow well?" "You need love, education, security," he said, tousling her hair. "And you have all of that now." The relationship between the siblings had developed naturally, but not without challenges. Evan, who had grown up as an only child, was learning to divide attention and responsibilities. Daisy, in turn, sometimes tested the limits of this new security, as if she needed to constantly confirm that she would not be abandoned again. In the main house, Martha prepared lunch while watching through the window the development of the relationship between the siblings. At 61, she had found a renewed purpose in caring for Daisy, but she was also facing age-related challenges that manifested themselves in subtle ways. "Martha," said Leonard, entering the kitchen, "are you okay? I've noticed that you've been more tired lately." "I'm fine," she replied, but there was a hesitation in her voice. "Just a little slower than before." Leonard watched her attentively. In recent weeks, he had noticed that Martha forgot small things, repeated instructions, and sometimes seemed confused about tasks she had performed for decades. It was worrying, especially considering that Daisy depended so much on her. "Maybe you should get some tests done," he suggested gently. "You don't need to worry about me," said Martha. but her voice didn't have its usual firmness. "I have more to worry about than taking care of our girl." It was at that moment that Bernice appeared at the kitchen door. In recent weeks, she had settled in a small rented house in town, but came to the property daily to help with housework, in an attempt to redeem her past mistakes. "Mr. Montgomery," she said, "there's a young woman at the door who wants to talk to you. She says it's about legal matters." Leonard frowned. "What kind of legal matters?" She wouldn't say. She just said it's about the lots that were sold. The mention of the sold lots made Leonard's stomach clench. Evan had managed to recover most of the land through agreements and payments, but some cases were still in legal dispute. When Leonard arrived in the living room, he found a young lawyer of about 30, elegantly dressed and carrying a briefcase of documents. "Mr. Leonard Montgomery, my name is Dr. Carmen Rodriguez. I represent the interests of some buyers of the lots sold by your nephew." "What kind of interests?" asked Leonard, feeling a familiar tension grow in his chest. "My clients have discovered irregularities in the sales documents. It seems that Evan did not have legal authorization to sell the properties." The revelation wasn't entirely surprising to Leonard, but hearing it officially brought a new dimension of problems. "And what do your clients want?" "Significant financial compensation, or the return of the lots with improvements included," replied the lawyer. "We're talking about almost $500,000 in damages." The number made Leonard sit down heavily. $500,000 was far beyond the financial capacity of the property, even with all the recovery efforts. "And if we can't pay?" he asked, fearing the answer. "Then we'll have to request the foreclosure of the entire property," said Dr. Carmen with cold professionalism. "It's an unfortunate situation, but my clients were also harmed." Evan, who had arrived from the field for lunch, heard the last part of the conversation. The blood drained from his face when he understood the implications. "Doctor," he said, approaching, "the sales were made in good faith. I believed I had authorization to—" "Unfortunately, good faith is not enough in legal matters," interrupted the lawyer. "Your buyers invested money based on documents that we now know were inadequate." Daisy, who was playing in the garden, noticed the tension through the open window and approached to listen. Even without fully understanding the legal terms, she grasped that something very bad was happening to her newfound family. "Are you going to take our house?" she asked, entering the room with the typical frankness of children. Dr. Carmen looked at the girl, clearly uncomfortable. "It's not our intention to harm anyone, especially children." "But that's what's going to happen," said Daisy with a disturbing wisdom. "You're going to leave us homeless like I was before." The child's observation created an awkward silence. Leonard knelt beside Daisy, trying to reassure her. "No one is going to take our house," he promised, although he didn't know how he would fulfill that promise. Dr. Carmen put away the documents. "Gentlemen, I'll give you 2 weeks to consult your lawyers and submit a proposal. After that, we'll have to proceed with legal action." After the lawyer left, the family gathered in the kitchen in somber silence. Martha had heard the whole conversation and was visibly shaken. $500,000, murmured Evan. "How are we going to get $500,000? "We can sell equipment, cattle, other assets," suggested Leonard, but everyone knew it wouldn't be enough. "What if we sell the house in town that belonged to my parents?" asked Evan desperately. "It's not worth even $100,000, replied Leonard. It was Daisy who asked the question everyone was avoiding. "If you can't get the money, will we have to leave?" The girl's simple question exposed the cruel reality of the situation. After finally finding stability and family, everyone ran the risk of losing everything again. "We'll figure it out," said Martha, but her trembling voice didn't inspire confidence. That afternoon, while Evan and Leonard discussed desperate options in the office, Daisy found Bernice in the garden, tending the plants with mechanical movements. "Aunt Bernice," said the girl, "are you sad because our family is going to end?" Bernice stopped watering the plants and looked at Daisy. "Honey, no one said the family is going to end. "But if we have to leave here, it will," said Daisy with ruthless, childish logic. "I know what it's like to be homeless. People scatter and never meet again." The observation touched Bernice deeply. She knelt beside the girl, seeing in her herself decades ago, a child who had lost everything and knew too much about instability. "Daisy," she said slowly, "if I tell you a secret, do you promise not to tell anyone yet?" "I promise," said the girl, her eyes widening with curiosity. "I have a sum of money saved, a lot of money, money I've saved during all these years working here." "How much money?" asked Daisy innocently. "Almost $200,000, revealed Bernice. "I always thought about using it to buy a little house of my own when I got old." "Why didn't you tell your Leonard?" Bernice sighed deeply. "Because I don't know if it's enough to solve the problem. And because part of that money comes from sources I can't easily explain." Bernice's confession created more questions than answers, but Daisy, with her childish ability to simplify complex situations, was direct to the point. "And Bernice, if you have money and we need money, why is it a secret?" The simple question forced Bernice to confront her own fears and selfishness. She had spent decades keeping secrets and lying, and now she had the chance to do something genuinely altruistic. "You're right, child," she said finally. "It shouldn't be a secret." That night, Bernice made a decision that would once again change the fate of the Montgomery family. She sought out Leonard in the office, where he and Evan were still trying to find impossible solutions to a problem that seemed insoluble. "Mr. Montgomery," she said, knocking on the door. "Can I talk to you?" "Of course, Bernice. Come in. I have a proposal to make." Bernice entered the office carrying a small brown leather suitcase, very old but well preserved. Leonard and Evan stopped their desperate discussions and looked at her with curiosity. There was something in Bernice's posture that suggested that this would not be a common conversation. "Sit down," she said, placing the suitcase on the table. "What I'm going to tell you will be difficult to understand, but I need to tell the whole truth." Leonard and Evan exchanged glances, preparing for another revelation in a series that seemed to have no end. "Bernice, if you have something that can help us," began Leonard. "I do," she interrupted, opening the suitcase. "I have $215,000 in here." The revelation left the two men speechless. Bernice removed from the suitcase several bundles of money organized with rubber bands, in addition to some yellowed documents. "How did you get so much money?" asked Evan, still processing what he saw. "That's the difficult part of the story," said Bernice, sitting down heavily. "You remember when I said that Valdirene blackmailed me for 5 years?" "I remember," confirmed Leonard. "Well, it wasn't just blackmail. It was an agreement, a very complicated agreement." Bernice took a deep breath before continuing. "When Valdirene came back 5 years ago, she didn't just come after Evan. She came because she found out that I had this money saved." "Money from where?" insisted Evan. "From your biological father," revealed Bernice, causing another shock. "Doctor Robert Silvera paid me to keep your existence a secret all these years." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Leonard stood up slowly, processing the information. "You're saying that Evan's biological father knew about his existence?" "Not only did he know," confirmed Bernice, "he contacted me a few weeks after Evan was left at the church. He said he had discovered through Valdirene that he had a son, but that he couldn't take responsibility publicly because of his family and reputation." Evan felt as if the ground were disappearing beneath his feet. "He consciously rejected me." "It wasn't quite rejection," Bernice tried to explain. "He offered me money to ensure you had a good life, but without anyone knowing about the connection with him." "How much money?" asked Leonard, although the answer was obvious. $5,000 a year for 20 years, plus bonuses when you completed important milestones, when you started school, when you graduated, when you started working on the farm." The math was clear. Dr. Silvera had paid more than $150,000 over the years to keep Evan as a well-kept secret. "And you accepted," said Evan, his voice filled with a deep hurt. I accepted because I thought it would be better for you, defended Bernice. The money allowed me to discreetly supplement your care. When you needed better clothes for school, when Leonard thought about sending you to study in the city, part of the resources came from that fund. Leonard frowned. Bernice, you helped me financially with Evan? In small amounts, in ways that you never noticed, she admitted. I left money in places where you would find it by chance. I paid some bills discreetly, I bought things that Evan needed and left them as if they were anonymous donations. The revelation explained several coincidences that Leonard had never fully understood. Moments when resources appeared exactly when he needed them, bills that were paid mysteriously, opportunities that arose at the right time. And Valderine found this out how? Asked Evan. She was always clever, said Bernice bitterly. When she came back, she started asking questions, investigating. She found out that I had a lot more money than I should have on my salary. She pressured me until I told the truth. And then she started the real blackmail. Understood Leonard. Exactly. She said that if I didn't help her get closer to Evan, she would tell you everything. Not just about the money, but about how Dr. Silvera was buying the silence about paternity. Evan stood up and walked to the window, trying to process all this information. Discovering that his biological father had always known of his existence, but chose to remain distant, was more painful than imagining that it had been an accident. Where is Dr. Silvera now? He asked. Retired in Kansas City, replied Bernice. Still married, with adult, legitimate children. Still paying to keep you a secret. The irony of the situation didn't go unnoticed by anyone. Dr. Silvera had paid for years to keep one son secret, without knowing that there was a second child living in precarious conditions just a few miles away. Bernice, said Leonard, returning to the immediate problem, the money you have can help, but it's still not enough to cover the damages. I know, she said, but I have a proposal. What kind of proposal? Bernice picked up one of the yellow documents from the suitcase. Dr. Silvera gave me this document 5 years ago. It's an informal recognition of paternity, with instructions to be used only in case of extreme need. Evan turned quickly. What kind of recognition? A document admitting that you are his son, with a commitment to assume financial responsibilities if necessary, explained Bernice. He never wanted it to be used, but he said it was a guarantee in case something serious happened. The implication was clear. They could use the document to pressure Dr. Silvera to contribute the remaining amount needed to save the property. That would be blackmail, observed Leonard. It would be justice, corrected Bernice. He has 2 children he never claimed. He has a moral obligation, if not legal. Evan returned to the table, looking at the document. And Daisy? Could she also have rights? Legally, yes, said Bernice. If we can prove paternity, both would have rights to retroactive child support and inheritance. But that would destroy his family, said Evan, showing a generosity that impressed the others. So what? Asked Bernice brusquely. He had 23 years to do the right thing. Now he has the chance to correct his mistakes or face the consequences. Leonard picked up the document and examined it carefully. It was detailed, specific, and clearly authentic. Dr. Silvera had been very careful in his provisions to keep his secret, but he had also left a loophole that could now be exploited. How much do you think he would pay to keep this secret? Asked Evan. 300,000 would be reasonable, said Bernice. Less than the scandal would cost for his reputation and marriage. At that moment, Daisy appeared in the office doorway, clearly having overheard part of the conversation. Are you talking about my real dad? The girl's innocent question brought a new perspective to the situation. It wasn't just about saving the property, it was about 2 children who had been rejected by the same man. We are, honey, said Leonard gently, and trying to decide what to do. Does he know that I exist? Asked Daisy. No, replied Bernice. Daisy thought for a moment with the seriousness that had become her trademark. Then maybe it's time he knew. The 4-year-old's observation carried a wisdom that surprised the adults. She had been abandoned, neglected, and almost lost the family she found. If the man responsible for her existence had the means to help, perhaps it was time for him to step up. "Daisy," said Evan, kneeling beside her, "this would mean telling a stranger that he's our father. Do you understand that?" "I understand," she said. "But if he's our blood father and we need help, then he has to help. That's what families do." The child's simple logic cut through all the moral and legal complexities of the situation. Dr. Robert Silvera had 2 children who needed help. It was time for him to take responsibility. "Then it's settled," said Leonard. "We're going to contact Dr. Robert Silvera." "And if he refuses to help?" asked Evan. "Then," said Bernice firmly, "we'll make it public that the respected Dr. Silvera abandoned 2 children and paid to keep it a secret for decades." Bernice's proposal had completely changed the game. From desperate victims, they had become people with real bargaining power. The question now was whether they would have the courage to use that power to save their family. The trip to Harmony Creek was tense and silent. Leonard drove a neighbor's borrowed car, with Evan in the passenger seat and Daisy sleeping in the back. Bernice had stayed at the estate with Martha, who was going through a particularly difficult period with her memory, sometimes not recognizing familiar faces. Evan looked out the window at the Kansas landscape, processing the fact that in a few hours he would meet the man who had abandoned him, but also secretly funded his education. It was a complex mix of anger, curiosity, and nervousness. "You okay?" asked Leonard, noticing the young man's tension. "I don't know," admitted Evan. "Part of me wants to thank him for helping financially. Another part wants to yell at him for rejecting me." "What about me?" said Daisy sleepily from the back seat. "How am I going to feel when I see him?" The girl's question caught the 2 men off guard. They had been so focused on Evan's feelings that they hadn't adequately considered how it would be for Daisy to meet a father who didn't even know she existed. "We don't know, honey," said Leonard honestly. "But we promise we won't let anyone hurt you. Dr. Robert Silvera lived in an upscale neighborhood of Harmony Creek, in a large house with manicured lawns. When they rang the doorbell, they were greeted by a housekeeper who led them to a living room decorated with expensive furniture and medical diplomas on the walls. Dr. Silvera appeared a few minutes later. He was a 67-year-old man, grey-haired, elegant in bearing, wearing a casual blazer that cost more than most people earned in a month. When he saw Evan, he stopped short, as if he had seen a ghost. "My God," he murmured, "you grew up exactly as I imagined." "Dr. Silvera," said Leonard, standing up, "thank you for seeing us." "Mr. Leonard Monterroyos," replied the doctor, extending his hand. "I've always wanted to meet you in person, to know how Evan was raised." "He was raised with love," said Leonard firmly, "as any father would." Dr. Silvera nodded, but there was discomfort in his eyes. "And this is?" he asked, looking at Daisy. "This is Daisy," said Evan, placing a protective hand on the girl's shoulder. "My sister." The word sister made Dr. Silvera frown. "Adopted sister, I imagine." "No," said Evan clearly. "Blood sister, your daughter." The revelation hit Dr. Silvera like a shot. He staggered slightly, needing to lean on the armchair. "That's impossible. I never—" "Connie Santos," said Leonard. "She got pregnant with Daisy 5 years ago. You're the father of both children." Dr. Silvera looked at Daisy with new eyes, and the similarities became impossible to deny. The shape of the eyes, the shape of the face, even the way she tilted her head were identical to Evan's. "Connie," he murmured, remembering. "The girl who worked as a cleaner in the office." "But that was years ago." 5 years, corrected Evan, "and you never knew because she moved before she realized she was pregnant." Dr. Silvera sat down heavily, running his hands over his face. "2 children," he said, as if talking to himself. "I have 2 children I never really knew." Daisy, who had remained quiet throughout the presentation, suddenly spoke. "Sir, "Are you our blood daddy?" The 4-year-old's direct question had a devastating impact on Dr. Silvera. He looked at that little girl, clearly well cared for, but with eyes that showed maturity beyond her age. "I am," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm your biological father." "Why didn't you ever come to see us?" asked Daisy, with the brutal honesty of children. Dr. Silvera struggled to find words that could explain decades of moral cowardice. "Because I was married. Because I had other children. Because I thought it would be better for you to have families who could take care of you properly." "But you sent money to Evan," observed Daisy. "Aunt Bernice told me." "Yes, I did," he admitted, "because I wanted to make sure he was okay." "And me? Did you want to make sure I was okay?" Daisy's question exposed the cruel difference in treatment between the two children. "Doctor, Silvera had secretly cared for Evan for decades, but never knew that Daisy existed and was living in precarious conditions. I didn't know about you," he said, tears beginning to form in his eyes. If you had known, you would have sent money to me too," asked Daisy. "I would have," he said without hesitation. "Of course I would have." Leonard decided it was time to get straight to the point. "Doctor Silvera, we came here because we need your help." "What kind of help?" Evan explained the whole situation, the irregular sales of the lots, the lawsuits, the possibility of losing the entire estate. Dr. Silvera listened in silence, his face showing a mixture of concern and growing guilt. "How much do you need?" he asked when Evan finished. 300, replied Leonard. Dr. Silvera didn't hesitate. "I'll transfer the money tomorrow." The speed of the response surprised everyone. Leonard had expected negotiation, resistance, perhaps even denial. "Just like that?" asked Evan. "Evan, for 23 years I paid to keep you a secret," said Dr. Silvera. "I paid not to have to take responsibility as a father, and now I find out that I have a second daughter who went without while I lived comfortably here." He stood up and walked to Daisy, kneeling down to be at her level. "Honey, forgive me for not being there when you needed me." Daisy studied the man's face for a long moment. "Are you going to be there now?" "If you allow it, yes. I can't change the past, but I can try to be a better father from now on." "Even if it causes problems with your family here?" asked Evan. Dr. Silvera looked around the elegant room, thinking of his wife and legitimate children who were away on a trip. "My family here has everything they need. You two are my children who need me now." At that moment, the living room door opened, and an elegant woman of approximately 60 years old entered. It was clearly Dr. Silvera's wife, who had returned from the trip earlier than expected. "Robert, who are these people?" she asked, immediately noticing the tension in the air. Dr. Silvera stood up slowly, realizing that the moment had come to face the complete truth. "Carmen, these are Evan and Daisy, my children." The silence that followed was deafening. Carmen looked from her husband to the two children, and the physical similarities made denial impossible. "Your children," she repeated, her voice icy. "How many secret children do you have, Robert?" "Just these two," he said, "and I know I can't ask for forgiveness for lying all these years." Carmen sat down heavily in an armchair, processing the revelation. 29 years of marriage," she murmured. "And you had children with other women." Daisy, sensing the tension, approached Carmen. "Ma'am, don't be mad at him. He didn't know about me, and he sent money to take care of Evan." The child's innocence in trying to defend the father she had just met touched Carmen deeply. "What's your name, dear?" "Daisy, I'm 4.5. "And you?" Carmen asked Evan. "Evan, I'm 23. I was raised by Mr. Leonard here after my biological mother left me at the church as a baby." Carmen looked at her husband with an expression that mixed anger, disappointment, and something that might be relief at finally knowing the truth. "Robert," she said finally, "are you going to take responsibility for these children?" "I am," he said without hesitation. "Then," said Carmen, surprising everyone, "let's do this right. Let's get to know these children properly and figure out how to be a family, even if it's not conventional. Carmen's reaction was completely unexpected. Instead of an explosion or an ultimatum, she was offering acceptance. "Carmen," began Dr. Silvera. "Robert, I always knew you kept secrets," she interrupted. "I'd rather know the truth and deal with it than keep living with lies." Daisy looked at Evan with bright eyes. "Brother, does this mean we have an even bigger family now?" "I think so," replied Evan, still processing how quickly everything was changing. When they left Harmony Creek in the late afternoon, they carried not only the promise of the money needed to save the estate, but also the prospect of a genuine relationship with the biological father they had just met. "How are you feeling?" Leonard asked Evan during the drive back. "Confused," admitted Evan. "But good. For the first time, I feel like Dr. Silvera really wants to be our father, not just pay to keep a secret." "And I'm happy," declared Daisy from the back seat. "Now we have Daddy Leonard, Daddy Robert, Brother Evan, Mommy Martha, and even a new stepmom." The simplicity with which Daisy embraced the expanded family made the two men smile. Even in the face of complex situations, she found reasons to celebrate the love that surrounded her. 6 months after the meeting in Harmony Creek, the estate was undergoing a transformation that no one could have imagined. Dr. Robert's money had resolved all the legal issues, but the changes went far beyond the financial aspect. The farm had become a true family center, with regular visits from Harmony Creek and a dynamic that mixed rural tradition with modern connections. Daisy, now 5 years old, ran through the garden chasing butterflies, while Evan watched her from the porch. The girl had grown visibly, not only physically, but in confidence and joy. Her hair shone in the sun, and her laughter echoed through the property like music. "Brother Evan," she shouted, stopping suddenly, "Martha is calling you." Evan went to the kitchen, where he found Martha sitting at the table with a serious expression on her face. At 62, the signs of memory loss had intensified in recent months, but she still had moments of complete clarity. "Son," she said, using the word with maternal affection, "I need to talk to you about something important." "What is it, Martha?" asked Evan, sitting down beside her. "It's about Daisy, and about me, and about something I discovered a few weeks ago but was afraid to tell you." The seriousness in Martha's tone made Evan alert. "What kind of thing?" Martha took a deep breath, as if gathering courage for a difficult confession. "You remember that little bracelet that Bernice kept all these years? The one that was with you when you were a baby?" "I remember," confirmed Evan. "Why?" "I recognized the bracelet," said Martha slowly. "Not just recognized, I knew exactly where it came from." Evan felt a familiar chill. After so many revelations in recent months, he had learned to fear these serious conversations. "Martha, what are you talking about?" "The bracelet was mine," she revealed. "I made that bracelet with my own hands more than 20 years ago." Evan's world seemed to stop. "How do you mean, yours?" "I made that bracelet for my first baby," said Martha, tears starting to stream down her face. "For the son I had when I was only 17 and was forced to give up for adoption." The revelation hit Evan like a train. He looked at the woman who had become his mother at heart, seeing her with completely new eyes. "You're saying that," he began, but the words were lost. "I'm saying that I'm your real biological mother," said Martha, her voice broken with emotion. "Valdirene Costa was just the woman that Dr. Robert paid to pretend to be your mother when he discovered that he had a son." The silence that followed was absolute. Evan processed the most shocking information of his life. The woman who had taken care of him in recent months, who had become his maternal figure, was literally his mother. "But Valdirene," he tried. "Valdirene was never your mother," confirmed Martha. "She was just a desperate woman that Dr. Robert paid to pretend to be your biological mother when he wanted to have some control over your situation." "And you knew this the whole time?" "No," said Martha quickly. "I only found out when I saw the bracelet. All these years, I believed that my son had gone to a family in another city. Bernice never told me that she had left you at the church right here. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together in Evan's mind. Bernice knew that you were my mother? Not completely, said Martha. She knew that I had a baby years ago and gave him up for adoption, but she never connected the dates. When she brought me to work here 15 years ago, it was genuinely by chance. Evan got up and walked to the window, watching Daisy play in the garden. So, for all these years, I've been living on the same property as my real biological mother. Yes, confirmed Martha. And I watched you grow up, took care of you when you were sick, celebrated your achievements without knowing you were my son. Why didn't you tell me when you found out? Martha wiped her tears with her apron. Because you already had a family. Leonard is your real father in every way that matters. I didn't want to complicate that. And now? Why are you telling me now? Because my memory is getting worse, she admitted. The doctors say it's the beginning of dementia. And I wanted you to know the truth before I forget everything. The revelation about Martha's condition added an emotional urgency to the situation. Evan turned to her, seeing not only the woman who had cared for him, but his biological mother, who was gradually losing her memories. Martha, Mom, he said, testing the word. Can I call you Mom? If you want, she said, smiling through the tears. It would be the greatest honor of my life. At that moment, Daisy ran into the kitchen, stopping abruptly when she saw the two adults crying. Why are you sad? She asked, approaching. We're not sad, honey, said Martha, pulling Daisy into a hug. We're discovering that our family is even more special than we thought. How so? Evan knelt beside Daisy. Remember how we found out we're blood siblings? I remember, said Daisy. Well, now we've discovered that Martha is my real mother, my blood mother. Daisy processed the information with the typical speed of children. So Martha is your blood mother and my heart mother? Exactly, confirmed Evan, and that means we're all real family in every way possible. The simplicity with which Daisy summed up the situation made the two adults laugh through their tears. It does mean that, said Martha, hugging them both. We're family in every way possible. Leonard appeared at the kitchen door, drawn by the sounds of emotional conversation. When Evan told him about the discovery, he showed no surprise, just a serene understanding. I always knew there was something special about the way Martha took care of you, he said. Now I understand what it was. You're not upset? Asked Evan. Upset? Why would I be upset? Leonard laughed. Finding out that the woman I love as family is literally your mother, that just makes everything more perfect. That afternoon, the entire extended family gathered for a special lunch. Dr. Robert and Carmen had come from Harmony Creek. Bernice was present, and even some close neighbors participated in the celebration. The table was laden with typical regional dishes that Martha had prepared with everyone's help. I want to make a little toast, said Daisy, standing up from her chair with her little cup of juice. Everyone raised their glasses, waiting for the words of the girl who had become the heart of the family. I want to thank you, she said in her clear voice, for finding such a big and complicated and perfect family. Complicated, laughed Carmen. It is, said Daisy seriously. We have Daddy Leonard, who adopted me, Daddy Robert, who is my blood father, Mommy Martha, who is Evan's blood mother and my heart mother, Brother Evan, who is my blood brother, Aunt Bernice, who kept secrets but is honest now, and stepmom Carmen, who is nice even though she doesn't have to be. Daisy's list drew laughter from everyone. And you know what's the best part? She continued. No one's going away. No one's going to leave me alone again. Never again, promised Evan, raising his glass. Never again, echoed everyone else. As the sun set over the estate that night, Daisy was in Martha's lap on the porch, listening to stories about the old days, while Evan and Leonard planned improvements to the farm. Dr. Robert and Carmen had decided to buy a house in the area to spend the weekends, and Bernice had agreed to return to work on the property, this time as an official part of the family. Martha, said Daisy sleepily, Even when you forget some things because of the illness, will you remember that you love me? Honey, replied Martha, kissing the girl's head, love is the last thing a person forgets. And the love I have for you and Evan is engraved so deep in my heart that not even the illness will be able to erase it. Promise? I promise. Daisy closed her eyes, finally at peace. She had begun her journey as a 4-year-old girl picking up soda cans in the streets, suffering neglect and abandonment. Now, at 5 years old, she was the center of a large, complicated but deeply loving family. Evan watched the scene from the window of the office, where he was organizing the farm papers. He thought about how his life had changed since that terrible day when he had been trapped in the crater. What had seemed like a tragedy had become the catalyst for discoveries that transformed all his family relationships. Son, said Leonard, approaching, are you happy? I am complete, Evan replied. I have 2 daughters at heart now, Daisy and Martha, a father who raised me with love, another father who is learning to love me, and an estate full of people who genuinely care about each other. And Valdirene? Do you still think about her? I do, admitted Evan, but not with anger. She was desperate and made bad choices. I hope she's found help for her problems. In fact, Valdirene had voluntarily checked herself into a rehab clinic after the whole truth came out. Dr. Robert, feeling responsible for facilitating her lies, was paying for her treatment. And the future? Asked Leonard. What do you want for the years to come? Evan looked at the farm he now managed with confidence, at the family gathered on the porch, at the life he had built from painful revelations and courageous choices. I want Daisy to grow up knowing she is loved unconditionally, he said. I want to take care of Martha while she still remembers us. I want to expand the farm so it can support all the families who depend on it. And I want to keep learning what it means to be part of a real family. Then let's do all that, said Leonard, placing his hand on the shoulder of the young man he had raised as his son, and who was now officially his heir and partner. That night, as the house quieted down and everyone prepared to sleep, Daisy said her silent prayer of gratitude. She had lost a mother who abandoned her, but found an entire family who chose her. She had lived on the streets, picking up soda cans, but now she slept in a warm bed in a house full of love. Her last words before falling asleep were a whisper to her grandfather in heaven. Grandpa, I used my stubbornness to do the right thing, like you taught me. And now I have the biggest and most complicated and most perfect family in the whole world. And indeed she did. Because sometimes the strongest families are not those built only by blood, but those forged through conscious choices of love, forgiveness, and mutual dedication. The estate had become not just a place where people worked, but a home where everyone knew they would be loved and protected, no matter how complicated their pasts were or how uncertain their futures might be. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment on what you thought of my story, giving it a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.